What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. If you guys are enjoying these daily uploads, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying this video. If we could aim for 1,000 likes on these normal daily videos, that seems good. All of that stuff you can do really helps the channel and ensures that I'll be able to continue making these videos for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as one of my favorite parts about making these things daily is hearing your guys' thoughts on the stories therein. Without further ado, guys, I will let you enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I will see you guys again at the end of the video. Have a great day. I, female and 23, was staying with my friend who's also female and 23 for a couple of weeks in the town I grew up in. She works at a restaurant, and without giving away too many details about the specific location, it's in a plaza with a river nearby. The plaza has the usual amenities of a movie theater, various restaurants and boutiques, and all that sort of thing. We entered through the parking garage, which has 3 stories, both elevators and stairs. This is important. She had a 6-hour shift, so I decided to do some shopping, listen to music, and walk around before eating at the restaurant my friend works at. I remember I was sitting at the bar on the corner alone, listening to some music. That was when a bigger man approached me. He had a security guard beanie on that was incredibly dirty and tattered up, and he was muttering with his eyes barely open. All I could hear from his muttering was things like, "Are you? I like your... Is anyone sitting?" But keep in mind, it was incredibly muted. I'm guessing what he was trying to say was asking to sit next to me and trying to compliment me. All of this was said while he was switching back and forth between looking into my eyes and staring at my chest. I tried to tell the man multiple times that I just could not understand what he was saying. After a bit of back and forth, I put the headphones back in and he left me alone. I told my friend about what happened and tried to shake it off, hoping it was just a weird, isolated incident. If that was where the story ended, I wouldn't even be writing this. Unfortunately, though, it's obviously not. About an hour later, I see someone approach the bar to my left out of the corner of my eye and felt their gaze fixate on me. I didn't look, but somehow I immediately knew it was him. I texted my friend and told her I was feeling really sketched out. I wanted to believe that I was simply misreading things and letting my anxiety get the best of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling there was something off with this guy. 30 minutes or so later, my friend got off. As we started walking toward the parking garage stairs to get to our car, I could see him waiting on a bench nearby, waiting for me. The benches aren't super close to the elevators. The second I spotted him, my blood ran cold. He saw us walking toward the stairs to the parking garage, and all of a sudden stood up and started sprinting for us. I was face to face with him by the time we got to the top of the stairs. We booked it back to the restaurant and used the employee elevator to get to her car. An employee escorted us to the vehicle as well. The employee told us there are a lot of cases of homeless people who wander around the area. I presume he was homeless and just walking in and out of various restaurants until he saw me. I'm incredibly thankful I trusted my gut and that I spotted him. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't see him at first, but I don't want to find out. Fair warning before this story starts. It contains some very distressing material, so if you don't wish to hear that, please skip ahead. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but it all started with a program I watched on TV. I had been watching it for about 2 years or so. I guess you could call me a bit of a fan. It wasn't a popular TV show, just had a minor following online, and each episode was only about 30 minutes long. It's since gone off the air. but one of the segments of the show was that they would ask viewers to send in creepy or mysterious submissions. To be honest, I think that was the best part of the show. I didn't really love the other segments as much. Just to give you some flavor of what the submissions were like, I'll give you some examples. I remember one where this guy sent in a video of his pet behaving extremely strangely in a very scary way. Another one was someone filming a very odd billboard as they passed through a town in the middle of nowhere. I can't remember what was on it exactly, but that one was really weird and led to some strange website for a cult. If you submitted a video of something strange and mysterious, and your video was selected to be on the show, then you won some sort of prize. Every time I watched that show, I would think to myself, I could come up with something that could make it on there. The prize, whatever it was, didn't really matter to me. I just wanted to think up something cool to fit the theme. Then an idea came to me. Although I guess it wasn't the most entertaining idea, it was my idea, and I couldn't wait to get started on this creation. I immediately started preparations, and the more I did, the more I was enthused with this project. It was a fairly straightforward idea. I wanted to attach a noose to something like a tree limb and make a sign to go with it. I wanted my sign to read, "Please feel free to use this." I wanted to stake it into the ground. All I needed was some wood. After I made the sign, next was the rope. I had to look online for how to properly make a noose. I thought it was going to be difficult, but it was a little easier than I thought. Just a side note, feel free to use this is a common phrase you might see outside of public restrooms or drinking fountains in parks. Now that my creation was ready, all I needed to do was find a place to take a photo or video of it, and then I could make my submission and send it in, as if I'd just stumbled across it. I had some annual leave available, so I decided to take a day off and drive out deep into the woods. I drove for miles to get there. I knew there was a quiet and peaceful forest just on the outskirts of the city. I got out of the car at a spot deep inside, carried my rope and my handmade sign with me, and was careful to make sure I was not seen by anyone. I knew these woods were very, very quiet. I headed in and was walking through the forest. As I got deeper, I managed to find what I considered to be the perfect spot for something eerie. I found a solid pine tree, pretty big with thick branches. There was one particularly thick one that jutted out about 3 meters above ground level, close to around 10 feet or so. I stuck my "feel free to use this" sign into the ground and made sure it was really deep in. Thankfully, it had rained that day, so the ground was plenty moist. I climbed the tree, which proved to be somewhat difficult in those conditions, and shimmied over to the branch that I had selected. I tied up the noose, and when all was complete, I climbed down from the tree and stood in admiration of how creepy my work was. I was pretty satisfied. By now, I'm pretty sure you get my idea. I wanted to take a short video as if I'd just stumbled across it hanging from the tree with the sign in front of it. I know it's not in good taste exactly, but I was certain it would be eerie enough to get on that TV show. When I went to take the video, though, it didn't seem quite right to me. Looked a little too new and staged, if you know what I mean. The "feel free to use this" sign I had made from brand new lumber from the hardware store in the city stood out like a sore thumb. It all just looked fake. I wanted to make my video look real. One saving grace was that the rope didn't look too bad, but supposedly brand new wood being discovered this deep into the forest, that would not do. I had to think of some way I could make it look more realistic. I didn't want to go through all that effort and fail with my submission. I thought about it for a while, and then it came to me. Because it had been raining and more rain was forecasted, I figured that if I just left it out there for a while and pretended to stumble upon it later, it might look a little more authentic after the weather had beaten it down a bit. I figured the wood from the sign would get covered in dirt and leaves from the wind and rain, and that would create the desolate atmosphere I was looking for. I wasn't that worried that a hiker or someone would find it and remove it. It was pretty far in. That was a risk, but I just had to take it. If I wasn't living in the city, I would have put it in my garden or something, but I was worried someone might see it and get the wrong idea. I didn't want the law to get involved either. To me, it was simply a hoax, a light-hearted thing. I didn't think I had committed a crime. Essentially, it was just a piece of performance art. That in mind, I decided not to be that worried about leaving it there. Who cares was my final thought as I headed back to my car through the forest. The following several days became very busy for me, and before I knew it, I had completely forgotten about making my video and the sign out there in the woods. Exactly 1 month later, I suddenly remembered my piece of art was still out there. I remembered it while I was watching that TV show, the one I was supposed to be submitting my video to. I immediately got into my car and drove off to the forest to see if it was even still there. During the month I had forgotten about it, there had been some typhoons passing through my prefecture. When I arrived back at the forest, I noticed there had been a lot of growth of the weeds and brush, and it was difficult to wade through this area. The forest floor was littered with broken tree branches and leaves, made it difficult to find my creation, and I would be lying if I said I didn't get a little lost trying to get out there. It didn't help that it was getting dark too. Not too dark to see though. I found it after a while, but the second I laid eyes on my creation, I knew I couldn't capture it on film as I had hoped for. The atmosphere surrounding the tree looked desolate now. My signboard, which I'd left as a brilliant white, was now gray, and the letters had slightly run down. It was pretty eerie to me, but not as eerie as what I saw next. As I approached closer, I got an ominous feeling. Someone had taken my prank very literally. The noose that hung from the tree now suspended what looked to be a body a few feet from the ground. I couldn't help but hope that it was simply a prop or something to go along with the scene. I could tell it appeared to be a woman, as their hair was long and matted with leaves and slick with rainwater. I couldn't see their face, and I'm grateful for that. I didn't know what stage of decomposition the body was in, and I didn't want to. As I approached, I could just smell it though. Based on how static they were, I could tell there was no life. Due to the wind, their body was slowly swaying from side to side. Every now and then the tree limb creaked and squeaked in the breeze. Their bodies slowly twirled, and just at the point where it would have been facing me, revealing the face of this victim, I ran for it. I ran as fast as I could. I was terrified. I'm still scared by what I saw. By the way, I thought about calling the police, but I was too frightened to even do that. If I reported it, then what would happen to me? It was only supposed to be a staged incident. If they found out I was the one who set this up, they might think I was encouraging people to do this. I wondered if what happened could be considered assisted suicide. I feel guilt every day, and I throw up just thinking about it. That had never been my intention. Still, I feel like I can't tell anybody because it might be the end of me. I keep an eye out on the newspapers and the local news for any discoveries out there in those woods, but so far there's been nothing. The guilt eats at me every day because for all I know that poor woman's body may still be swinging undiscovered and creaking in the breeze. I'm a real outdoorsy kind of guy. I love mountain hiking, climbing, fishing, going on long walks, and camping out in the elements. I always go alone, as I find it to be a much more immersive experience when it's just me and nature. Sometimes it can get pretty creepy though. I've had encounters with animals and heard strange noises out there in the dark of night. Nothing can be weirder though than what happened when I went mountain hiking last summer. After a long day of hiking, I set up my tent to get some sleep for the night. I had left it until kind of late, because I was pushing myself to cover as much ground as possible. It was twilight by the time I got into my sleeping bag and pretty much dark out. I got to sleep pretty quickly, but later that night I was awoken by some strange noises. It sounded to me like water splashing nearby, almost like a stone being dropped into a deep puddle or something. I roughly knew where the nearest water source was, and it was a river pretty far away from where I was currently camping. I laid there in my tent, thinking, what the hell is going on? I'm pretty sure I'm not anywhere near a water source. I was half asleep in a dreamlike state. I was just on the edge of slipping back into restful dreams, but then I began to hear a different sound. This one was more of a dry rustling sound, like someone wading through knee-high thick grass. This sound alerted me. All of a sudden, I didn't quite feel that alone. I listened intently, and after a couple of moments, I figured out that this dry rustling noise was circling my tent. I was really freaking out at that point. I mean, I did have a knife, but it was in my rucksack at the foot of my sleeping bag. I was too scared to make a grab for it. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake, because then at least I would have the element of surprise on my side. I tensed up and tried to keep my heavy breathing to a minimum, all the while desperately trying to think of what to do next. Just as quickly as it began, though, it was suddenly over. The rustling through the grass headed back off the way it came. The very next noise I heard was that drippy, watery sound coming back. Then, after a few more moments, there was nothing. No more sounds except the distant cries of crickets and other nocturnal animals. I was not able to get back to sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about those sounds, the water one in particular. My mind was torturing me with the possibilities of what had been out there. Could it be a bear? Some random person in the middle of nowhere? Was someone taking note of my position to potentially come back later? It could have been anything, and there was no way I was going to get sleep with those thoughts in my mind. Once it was light out, my confidence returned. I got up and took a look around. I wanted to find a logical explanation for what I'd heard. I noticed something a little ways off. It was a stone structure, hidden a little ways away from where I'd pitched my tent. It looked very old, and as I got closer, I discovered it was a well. That was especially weird. What was the use of having a well this far out into the mountains? Perhaps there was a village here, or a house in this area, in days long gone. I thought about it to myself, until those thoughts were replaced with much more unpleasant ones. Those noises I'd heard last night all made sense now. To me, it sounded like something had climbed up out of the water of the well, circled my tent, and then returned back to it. I went over to the well and gingerly looked down inside. There was nothing but reddish-brown brackish liquid at the bottom, an almost empty well that had clearly been dry for a very long time. I have no idea how what I heard the night before could have even been possible. It's the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd heard some strange hark back to years gone by. Maybe something sinister happened in that area. Or maybe they were just residual sounds of ghosts long past. I will never have a way to know. When I was about 5 years old, my mom had a boyfriend who ended up being my little brother's dad. I guess he was my stepdad, but the real dad to my half-brother. We'll call him Daniel. I loved and will always love my little brother, but his dad caused a whole lot of trauma for all of us. I was about 8 years old at the time, and my little brother was 3. We shared a bedroom right next to my mom and Daniel's room. My little brother was fast asleep, and I was just about to close my eyes and drift off. That was until I heard a rumbling through the wall. I jolted my eyes wide awake, and I was frozen in place, trying to be as quiet as I could. I wanted to hear what was going on. I could hear my mom quietly telling Daniel, "Stop, you're hurting me." My heart dropped. I didn't know what to do. I was scared and couldn't move. My ears felt red as I heard my own heartbeat pounding loud. And that's when I heard my mother begin screaming, "Stop, I can't breathe!" I heard a loud thud, which I'm assuming was Daniel pushing her off. I heard her tumbling down, and I quickly laid back down. I couldn't stop looking at the doorway. I watched as my mom's door swung open, and then she ran out of the bedroom crying. I presume she ran downstairs to our bathroom, which had a lock on it. Not even 2 seconds later, Daniel began chasing her. He banged on the bathroom door and yelled to open it up. My mom replied, "No, why did I wake up to you choking me?" I was now trembling in my bed. The floorboards were paper thin, which was no help shielding me away from my trauma. I could hear Daniel continuing to bang on the door, sounding like he was trying to break it down, but to no avail. I saw him walk back into the bedroom. My mom, after a while, came into our room and then closed the door ever so quietly. She slept with my little brother on the top bunk. This was the first time of many assaults from what Daniel did to my mom. There's been many times where he's cheated on her, thrown her plate off the table after she cooked us all dinner, and even stolen her keys to make sure she couldn't leave for work or school. This next one isn't the second one he did, but it's the second earliest one I can still remember so vividly. I was about 9 or 10 at the time, and my little brother had an issue wetting the bed. He had a cutoff point to be able to drink water. My mom and Daniel had been fighting and arguing all day. However, my brother was sick, and he was drawing a fever. I was helping my mom to put away the dishes after dinner, and saw my brother walk in asking for a glass of water. My mother turned to him and said, "Now, you're not going to wet the bed if I give this to you, right? You gotta make sure you go to the bathroom." He shook his head no, and said he promised to make sure before going to bed. I handed her a clean glass from the dishwasher, and she gave it to him. Soon after, we heard loud stomps coming from the living room. My mom quickly took the glass away from him and hid it behind her back. It felt like slow motion, as I saw the fear in my mom's eyes. Daniel got right up into her face and took the glass from behind my mom. He splashed the water in her face and then smashed it against her head. I couldn't help myself but to scream. My mom stumbled back as Daniel then threw the glass on the ground and shattered it. He dragged my little brother by the shoulder as he was crying. I made sure my mom was okay, and we could hear Daniel screaming at my little brother. My mom and I rushed in there, and she tried to tell him it was her fault, and he was just not feeling well. Daniel and my mom continued to fight, while me and my little brother cried in bed. I know these stories aren't exactly uncommon, but as a kid, I witnessed stuff like this multiple times firsthand. It gave me major PTSD as an adult, and I would never wish someone to live the childhood I lived. It was awful. This story took place when I was a kid. My dad had been a pool man for many years, and one of his oldest customers decided to purchase a ranch. I don't remember exactly where it was. He asked my dad if he could come and fix their pool, which was disastrously maintained before the guy had bought it. He gave my dad permission to bring us along as well, and told us we were all welcome to stay a few days and enjoy the ranch. We drove there, and I had been in charge of reading the MapQuest instructions. I never seemed to be able to sleep during car rides for whatever reason. We drove back home a few days later, after my dad was finally able to save the pool. The drive home was very long, and for long stretches the view was mostly deserted farms and the occasional small suburban town. Unlike my mom and brothers, who knocked out almost immediately and stayed asleep for most of the trip. My dad and I stayed up talking or listening to music. I'm a very avid reader as well, so I had a book on my lap beside the maps. I remember the ride had been very quiet for a while. Although I had been reading, I had to stop because it was getting dark, and my dad only let me turn on the dome lights to read maps. No radio service, and the Game Boy batteries had all died. All I had left to do was look outside. All of a sudden, I spotted a tall shadow on a roof. I realized there was some sort of man who seemed to be wearing a big top hat. He was dancing, jumping from roof to roof. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. On a second glance, I realized this was not a normal thing at all. The houses were separated in such a way that there was no way a normal person could jump from roof to roof like that. What scared me the most, though, was that as he reached the end of the field, he seemed to sense me. He looked over and stared right at me. Even though I couldn't see it, I could sense somehow that he was smiling at me. I turned to face my dad to see if he saw the same thing, but he had been paying attention to the road. When I turned back, I couldn't see the houses anymore, as they were way behind us. I never saw a face or any details, really. He was just a silhouette on the rooftops. I remember being afraid for some reason that whoever this was would follow us, that it could get wherever it wanted to if it did. I never saw something like that on our many road trips ever again, and sometimes I wonder if I imagined it in the first place. It was so real, though, and the memory is so vivid as well. It always comes back when I'm watching old musicals, because the way they dance in those reminded me of the way this person and or thing was moving. A few years ago, I played a lot of video games. I've always been kind of on and off with gaming. I'll play quite a bit for a month or two, and then go a long time barely playing any at all. Overall, I'm just not very consistent. Just depends on how busy I am and stuff. This was back in like 2018 or 19 maybe. I was playing Fortnite a lot, as well as some other games. I played on PlayStation 4, and would sometimes play with friends online. Most of my PlayStation friends, though, were random people who I had played with in the past. They sent me a friend request or something, but I didn't actually know them in real life. One time when I logged onto my PlayStation, I had another friend request. I had no idea who it actually was, and I don't even remember the username at all. I did what I always did. I accepted it and started playing. Maybe 30 minutes later, I got a request to join a game on Fortnite. It was from the person whose request I had just accepted. I decided to join them in the game because I figured, why not? When we started playing, I saw the other person had a microphone, but they weren't saying anything. I had one as well, so I asked some general questions about the game. We were playing duos. If you don't know what that means, it means we were on the same team. My questions went unanswered. I figured that either their headset was not on their head, or maybe it was broken or something. Not all too uncommon. I stopped talking to them after it was apparent they were not going to respond to me. I still didn't know who it was, though. I assumed it was a random person I must have played with sometime before. We played around and lost fairly quickly. Then we decided to play another. This time, about 5 minutes into the new round, the person finally spoke. It was a man's voice, which was extremely deep. Actually, thinking back on it now, they were very obviously using some kind of voice changer. The voice sounded very creepy, and the man said my real full name. Immediately, that got my attention. What followed was a completely crazy-sounding rant that started out absurd and then got threatening. I don't remember any of the specific things because it was all so crazy. After he paused, he started talking again and said, "If you don't think I'm serious, I know much more than just your name." I was already very creeped out by this guy. He then said exactly what city I lived in and my state as well. That was enough for me to panic, hit the power button on my PlayStation, and turn it off. I went so far as to unplug it from my wall. My heart was racing, and I was now sweating as well. I wondered who that person was and what had just happened. Eventually, after 10 minutes or so, I composed myself and turned my PlayStation back on. I located the person on my friends list. I saw he had sent me several messages now. I clicked on one, and it was only revealing even more personal details about me. I didn't want to read any of the rest. I reported and blocked him, and got off my PlayStation. After that, nothing else happened really. No, he did not show up at my house or call me on my phone or anything, at least not that I'm aware of, but it still creeped me out quite a bit, so much that I didn't play video games for a while after. Years later, I still wonder who that even was. I played many video games since then, and nothing like that has ever happened again. I don't know if it was a prank either, because nobody I know ever said anything about it, and I think they would have by now. Besides, my friends aren't really the type to do that. Who that man was, and why he so deeply hated me, remains a mystery to this day. This happened about 7 years ago. On a business trip, I stayed in Ikebukuro in a well-known hotel. There's something I want to mention about me. Sometimes I feel as if I have a sixth sense. By that, I mean I feel as if I'm aware of otherworldly presences when I encounter them. I wouldn't say this sense of mine is particularly strong, but it is there. I want to share an experience that happened when I stayed in that hotel. The room I stayed in was room 913. I was staying for one night. A senior coworker at my company was staying in the room next door. From the moment I opened the door to room 913, I felt something strange. I had this weird feeling I hadn't ever had before. It was, and still is, indescribable. Because that indescribable feeling was so unusual, I didn't know what to think about it. I figured it was just my imagination. Now I can see it was clearly an early warning sign. I was picking up on a red flag. As night came and darkness fell upon the hotel quickly, it was February, by the way, I thought the best thing I could do for work the following morning was go ahead and get an early night's sleep. I drifted off with ease, but I didn't stay awake for very long at all. I woke up to the sound of someone barging into my hotel room. I could tell it was a man almost instantly. It was like I knew without even seeing him. I could also tell that this appeared to be some sort of sleep paralysis, the beginning of some kind of nightmare. My brain was fully functioning, but my body was glued to the bed. It was like I was just watching what was happening, as if it were a movie or out-of-body experience. The man who was in my room was not a native Japanese person like me. I was sleeping on my side with my back facing the door, and the man had just come in. He wandered around my dark hotel room for a while, and then walked around the bed to face me. He stared right into my face, and looked so angry and rage-filled. Suddenly, his hand shot to my neck, and he began to choke me. I was so scared of how much this man seemed to hate me and want to hurt me. I felt myself choking and losing oxygen. I really started to panic, and then all of a sudden I was able to move like nothing had happened. I was all alone in my hotel room. I was so freaked out by what had just happened that I wanted to call my coworker. I wanted to speak to someone. I couldn't, though. I hadn't left my phone by my bedside table. I had left it to charge on a desk, and there was a mirror on that desk. There was no way in hell I was going to look into that past midnight. Side note, mirrors are a very prominent item in Japanese spiritual folklore. There's a belief for some people in Japan that if you look at yourself in a mirror after midnight, you might see something else there. Mirrors can be considered portals and pathways into different worlds. I stayed awake until the early morning light spilled into the room, and only at that point did I feel confident enough to shut my eyes for a few moments. My colleague came to my hotel room so we could head downstairs for breakfast together. After checking it was him out of the peephole, he cried out in shock when he saw me open the door. He could tell that something was wrong. I looked terrible. At breakfast, I talked to him about what happened the night before. The worst thing about our situation was the fact we were staying at that hotel for another few nights. After work that day, I called a friend of a friend who was into the occult and supernatural and asked him for some advice. He told me how to better deal with what I had experienced, and I followed his instructions. It did nothing to improve the atmosphere, though. What he got me to do managed to at least calm me down. Just after midnight, I heard a loud bang coming from the wall that separated my room from my colleagues. It scared the hell out of me. It sounded like a really powerful blow. After I gave it some thought, I guessed that it could have been my colleague playing a prank on me. With that in mind, I managed to get some sleep. In the morning, I saw my colleague again for breakfast, and I said to him, "Oh, great prank last night, banging on the wall like that." He said he had no idea what I was talking about. To be completely honest, I'm pretty sure he was telling the truth about that. It scared me to think I may have been close to experiencing another paranormal onslaught. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, and only a few eerie occurrences for the rest of the trip. I can still remember the face of that figure who strangled me. I'll look for that face in the crowds of Tokyo, but I don't think I'll ever see him. If I did, I think I'd have a heart attack. I wonder if that was just my brain conjuring up that man attacking me, or if something really supernatural happened in that hotel room. I had two friends, a couple. The guy was really funny and kind. Well, except to her. I really enjoyed being around him when he was calm. He had a rough childhood and didn't have any family, and couch surfed often. Even in high school, he was in and out of jail, but those two had dated for years and had children. He was extremely abusive to her, and everyone in the friend group knew it. It was sort of normalized because most of the men there were all abusive to their girlfriends, mine included. He actually went to jail for a period of time, and she moved on and seemed to be happy. Then he got out and they seemed to get back together, but she was making it pretty obvious she was over it and had started standing up for herself. She enjoyed the freedom and happiness she had when he was in jail. She wanted away from him. Obviously, he did not take this well. She was basically all he had, and he refused to let her go. I remember I got a phone call one morning that he had killed her, then spent hours in their home before he finally killed himself as well. I remember that shortly after that, my boyfriend and I were fighting over something inconsequential when he literally said to me, "You know what? I'm going to do to you what he did to her." I left that very same night, after 6 years of enduring all his abuse. I like to think that she's part of the reason I had the strength to leave and never look back. There were many warning signs, but no one ever thought he'd take it that far. I now feel so ashamed that I didn't take action, or at least help her before it got that far. This might sound somewhat humorous to some people, but I can promise you it was not funny in the moment. I used to work at a Walmart, and one day I was walking the aisles when suddenly I spotted this lady opening up a bottle and chugging down the contents. This made no sense to me at the time, because I knew the store pretty well and the place where the lady was standing. It was the place where I was pretty certain we kept all the hot sauce. But then, she couldn't have been just chugging hot sauce. Why would she do that? I walked up to her, and I said something like, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you alright?" Just the sight of her must have had my jaw dropping. She had bloodshot eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, and she was wheezing and breathing really heavily. It was obviously burning her mouth really bad. She was sweating and gasping in pain. It was the craziest thing to see. People have joked when I told them the story, saying, "Oh, she must have loved hot ones or whatever." But when I say this woman was trying to hurt herself with hot sauce, I mean that legitimately. She kept on drinking and drinking until she was crying and moaning in pain. I called security, and by the time security came over, she could barely stand up. Blood was beginning to trickle from her nose, and she was holding her stomach in pain. Security just sort of dragged her outside, and she laid there until someone finally called 911. EMTs came and took her away. I used to think about her a lot, hoping that she was doing better now. She seemed to be very sick in the head. This is something that took place many years ago when I was a child. I believe I was around 7 years old. One day, I went shopping with my mother and younger sister at Target. It was a commonplace event for my entire family to go and get whatever we needed or wanted. When we got there, my sister was sitting in the shopping cart and my mother was pushing it along. I was walking alongside her, and we walked around the store grabbing various things for a while. I remember that we got to like the back end of the store, sort of near the corner. I don't remember what department it was. It was not groceries, I know that much at least. As my mother was shopping around, somehow I wound up in the next aisle over from her. I'm not sure if I was distracted by something on the shelf or what, but I was still pretty close by. That's when I saw a Target employee approaching me. I'm not even sure where he'd come from. It was a man wearing the classic red shirt and khakis. He approached me, and I remember he asked if I wanted to see something really cool. Of course I did, and I said yes. He then told me to follow him and started walking away. He didn't go very far, though, before he arrived at these doors that led to the back rooms. I had always seen these doors in stores, and I knew that I was not allowed to go past them. I had always wondered what was behind those doors, though, and what was in the back room of the store. He opened them wide and told me I could go in. I was really curious, and I thought it was so cool that he was showing me this. I walked in after him, and he closed the doors behind us. It was almost like he was giving me a tour. He was pointing at various things, telling me what it was all for. I remember he said that's where they kept all the items before they went out into the store. We continued to walk back, little by little, until now I had sort of forgotten about going back to my mother and sister. I was really interested in what I was seeing. I felt like it was okay that I was so far back there, because this guy worked at the Target. I remember that this other guy, who also appeared to be an employee, walked over to us and said hello. The three of us kept walking, and I remember seeing this other door that led to the outside. The men told me that I should check out where the deliveries were made, and said I should go outside to this area. This is when I started to get a really bad feeling. For some reason, I hadn't found it a problem to be asked to walk in the back with the men, but now that I was being asked to go outside, something felt different. I knew my mother would be really upset if I left the building. I stopped even though they were encouraging me to leave. I said no thanks, and started to walk back. I said my mother was probably looking for me, and I had to get back to her right now. I remember the two guys were insisting it was fine, and my mother had okayed it with them. I knew for sure they hadn't spoken to her though, so I got even more suspicious. I started to walk back toward the back doors that we had initially come through. That's when one of the men started to rush toward me aggressively. That was enough to make me start running away. I sprinted as fast as I could toward the back doors. I could hear the men chasing after me. I remember that I just barely reached the doors and threw them open. The man reached out and grabbed me right as I did, but luckily my mom was right on the other side of those doors. She saw me emerge from there, and the man noticed this as well. He let go of me and turned and ran away. My mom asked me why I had been in the back rooms, and when I told her the story, she went back there herself with me to see if the men had gone. They weren't back there anymore, and the back door that had been open leading to outside was also now closed. I remember my mother found one of the store managers, and it led to a really big thing. I don't really remember much else after that, though. Looking back, I'm just glad I realized when I did to go back to my mother and not follow those men outside. I don't think either of those men really worked at Target at all. So this happened while I was on a trip. I was staying in a traditional Japanese inn, and the inn was incredibly old, as they usually tend to be. It was mainly wooden in construction. This was a work trip, by the way. I work as a tour guide up and down the country, not quite as luxurious as it sounds. The reason being that my company always booked the cheapest hotel rooms they could find for their employees' work trips, and more often than not, employees shared rooms with one another to make even further savings. I was relatively new to the company when this experience took place. It seemed as if the room in the inn that my colleagues and I were going to be staying in was one that wasn't rented out often. The inn was almost fully booked, aside from that one room. When I got in there, I thought, wow, it's actually pretty dark and creepy in here. I didn't know exactly why I felt that way, though. I had some time to kill before we had dinner, so I looked around the hotel room. I opened the big closet door to see what was in there, and then when I closed the closet door and turned to leave, I noticed something out of place. There was a heavy wardrobe on one side, and there appeared to be some kind of door behind it. I shoved the wardrobe to one side to get a better look at it. Affixed to the door was this strange kind of talisman that looked like a seal of some kind, perhaps of the religious variety. The door was sealed up tight, and there were no gaps at all. This must have been the door to the attic or something, since we were on the top floor. That weird door gave me goosebumps. I moved the wardrobe back to where it was. I had thought the dim lighting of the room was the cause of that creepy feeling I had before, but I guess subconsciously that door might have had something to do with it. I didn't feel like being alone in that room anymore. I went to try and find the other guys. There were 4 of us in total, and all of us were going to be sleeping in that room together. I told one of my colleagues about my mysterious discovery, the weird sealed-off hidden door. He didn't seem to be fazed at all, wasn't that interested really. I asked him outright why he wasn't surprised by what I found. He simply said, well, if I spent all my time looking for things to be surprised about, I wouldn't exactly be good at my work now, would I? Suit yourself, I thought, as I walked off. I was convinced there wouldn't be any rooms left available in the inn, so I just had to bear with this weird discovery. At least I wasn't going to be staying alone in that room. That was one positive. We all hung out talking about work and what we would be doing tomorrow in a kind of informal meeting. It went on until about 1 a.m. Although it sounds kind of boring on the surface, it was actually pretty fun. We had drinks, everyone loosened up a little. I felt much more at ease now. I took a bath, which was very nice actually. I went to bed at about 2 a.m. Everyone else was just about ready for bed by that time too. About 10 minutes after the lights went out, we were all laying in bed and I began to hear some light snoring. I guessed that everyone else was now asleep. I, on the other hand, couldn't get any sleep no matter how hard I tried. No matter how many times I flipped the pillow or changed my position, I couldn't get to sleep at all. It was around that same time that I started to hear some strange noises. At first, I could barely hear it, but after a few moments, the sound grew louder. It was coming from somewhere above us. It sounded like someone was walking around up there, like someone was just bumbling around in a circle. After a while, I began to hear a second pair of footsteps as well. The second set sounded like they were a little further away from the first. It sounded like the two owners of these footsteps then began talking to one another. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could get a sense of the tones they were using, and the tone I was hearing was not a nice one. It sounded like they were having a heated argument. I didn't like it. I obviously knew the door to the attic was sealed shut and had a wardrobe placed in front of it, so those voices and footsteps up there really had me freaked out. How could they get up there? Surely there wasn't anyone up there. I asked myself that question, but I was unable to answer it. I worked myself up so much that I really wanted to turn the light on. I was essentially scared of the dark as an adult, and it was pretty embarrassing in a room full of other adult men. I tried to resist the urge, but I could not fight it. I was scared. I got up and headed toward the light switch. As soon as the lights came on, all the noises from above us stopped, and the attic fell silent. I stood there in place by the light switch for a moment, listening intently. I woke up one of my colleagues. I had to talk to someone. I went for my work friend who was the nicest to me, not that guy I spoke to earlier. I woke him up and told him what happened. He was annoyed, of course, that I'd woken him, but overall not that surprised by what I had to say. He said there was a reason why this room was so cheap. A couple of them found out last time after they heard strange noises. They ended up searching online about the inn after they stayed there and read that others had experienced similar things. Some said it was haunted. Some thought there must be a secret area where people were spying on the guests. He asked me, "Why do you think we all stayed up so late?" I asked him why the hell he didn't tell me we were staying in a damn haunted house. He said that if I knew it was supposed to be haunted, I'd never have gone to sleep in the first place. Well, he certainly knew my character well. How kind of you, my friend, I thought, as I slunk back to my bed and buried my head in the covers. I barely got a wink of sleep that night. I had the feeling that if there really were ghosts up there, something very bad must have happened in the attic of that inn. I get the feeling I don't particularly want to find out what it was, though. I had just received some bad news while I was walking home after hanging out with some friends. I was walking down the street sobbing when I noticed a guy sitting in a parked truck and staring at me. I was a little too occupied with my own thoughts, though. I just kept walking with music in my ears, trying to cheer myself up. Soon enough, I felt somebody grab my shoulder and whip me around. It was that same guy from the truck. He had seen me crying and stopped to ask me if I was okay. I took out my earphones and tried to tell him I was fine and wanted to go home. He hugged me, and I couldn't help myself from bursting into tears. It felt like such a random act of kindness. All of a sudden, though, his grip got tighter and tighter, and I started to feel uncomfortable. He wouldn't let me go. I looked up at him because he was way taller than me and begged him to let me leave. He pulled me in and kissed me and started to drag me towards his truck, saying how pretty I was and that he was going to keep me. I panicked and tried kicking him, but he was way bigger than me. I screamed for help, and luckily 2 guys were close enough to hear me. They ran over and made the guy let me go. I never ran that fast home in my life, and the worst part about it is, it was all in broad daylight. He was intentionally using the fact I was in such a fragile state to take advantage of me. I used to work in a fast food place, and I remember some nights this guy would come in, always on his own, and always ordering the exact same thing every time. He would never make eye contact with whoever was on the register, and he always spoke in the most quiet voice I could imagine. He'd wait for his food and kind of sway back and forth, like he was barely holding it all together. When his food was ready, he'd grab it and dart out the door. He did this so many times that he got a reputation for it. It really creeped people out. Anyway, a long time after, we began to see his face on the news, saying he was wanted in connection with someone going missing. It turns out that person was his mom. She hadn't disappeared at all. She'd been murdered. A week later, we got the news that this guy had been caught. It was him that killed his own mother, made a full confession, and went to jail, possibly forever. It's just crazy, thinking that I served this random stranger many times, and he didn't seem dangerous at all. He just seemed like a kind of weird guy, but he ended up being a killer. I used to work in a big coffee chain here in Canada, and during the winter we had a real problem with homeless people trying to get out of the cold for a while. Most were actually pretty cool. They just hang out, charge their phones, maybe order a coffee with some change they'd collected. But this one guy in particular became a real problem for us. First off, his pants always seemed to be wet, and he always wanted to hand us wet bills or coins that he'd pulled from his pants pockets. I did not want to think about why his pets were wet. I just doused my hands in hand sanitizer every time I had to serve him. Then came the week where for 6 shifts in a row or so, he showed up minutes after closing and demanded we still serve him. He got extremely angry when we told him no the first time, so the manager told us to just serve him so we could get him to go away. I think that gave him the green light, though, to just keep doing it over and over. We got so sick of him showing up, we tried to tell him no. Then he went around the drive-thru and tried to climb inside, screaming about how he was going to kill all of us. We had to call the cops and the man was arrested. I feel like we were pretty lucky no one was hurt that day. When I was 12, I was riding my bike on a bike path next to my house. It was around noon or 1 p.m. or so, and it went along a canal. Usually, there were at least a few people on this path. On this day, in the section I was riding though, it was empty except for me, and one big guy that looked like a biker from a bad movie. The roads were not close by, so if you were on the path, you were either on a long walk, jogging, or riding your bike. Except for this asshole. This guy was waving his arms in the air, calling for me to stop. He said his car had broken down, and blah blah blah. Luckily, the reptilian part of my brain kicked in and told me something was not right about this situation. This next part happened within the span of 2 to 4 seconds. I pretended I was going to stop my bike by slightly slowing down. When he lunged at me to grab me off of it, I was able to pedal harder than I had before and slipped around him quite easily. He really tried to grab me too. My heart was pounding. To this day, I still can't believe it happened, and I can't believe my plan worked either. That man meant me true harm. I saw it in his eyes when he went in for the final grab. The other sad fact of the day is that was the day I lost respect for my parents entirely. They refused to call the police because they refused to believe me. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in the comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.